is a former presidential campaign spokeswoman and a frequent contributor to the Harvard Business Review and Forbes. Recognized as a branding expert by the Associated Press, she is the author of Reinventing You, Define Your Brand, Imagine Your Future, and a marketing strategy consultant and speaker for clients including Google, Fidelity, Microsoft, Yale University, Morgan Stanley, and the World Bank. She's an adjunct professor of business administration at Duke University's Fuqua School of Business and has taught executive education at the University of North Carolina's Keenan Flagler School of Business and HEC Paris. She has also guest lectured at Harvard Business School, the Harvard Kennedy School, Stanford University's Graduate School of Business, the University of Pennsylvania Wharton School, and more. Her work has been published in the Harvard Business Review Guide to Getting the Right Job and the Harvard Business Review Guide to Networking. And she frequently appears in worldwide media, including NPR, the BBC, and MSNBC. You can learn more about her at DorieClark.com and follow her on Twitter at Dorie Clark. And I have to say, on a personal note, when I was 18 years old, I entered my first year at Smith College in Northampton, Massachusetts. Well, when Dorie was 18 years old, she graduated Phi Beta Kappa from Smith College. So I am personally delighted to welcome another Smithy to our Fast Track Author Series. So Dorie, I'm turning it over to you. Welcome.
Helena, thank you very much, and hi everyone. I am going to turn on my webcam here, and hopefully you can see me. I figure if you're going to be spending the next hour with me, you don't just want to look at a PowerPoint, so hopefully we can interact a little bit. So FYI, I'm going to go through and present some of these ideas, but toward the end we're going to have a good 15 or 20 minutes for Q&A, and I look forward to your questions. Throughout, you can feel free to type them in as things occur to you, and we'll go forward at the end. But as Elena was saying, here we go. I wanted to talk to you a little bit today about my book, Reinventing You, which basically, as I describe it, it's about personal branding and professional reinvention. And the way that these things come together is that, as many of you guys have seen in your own lives, particularly if you're entrepreneurs, you've probably reinvented yourself as such. Some people start out as entrepreneurs right out of the gate, but for many of us, we've done other things before launching our own business. And we know that the pace of business has been accelerating rapidly. If you want to be offering the best things to your clients, if you want to be perceived as on the cutting edge of your field, you have to keep going and keep moving the ball forward, because if you stand still, you're going to be falling backwards. But where this factors in with personal brand, the intersection of those two things, is the fact that if other people don't know about your continual reinvention, their perception of you is likely to get really ossified. It's going to be stuck in the past. And unfortunately, that means that you are going to be denied opportunities that should rightfully be yours, just because people aren't thinking of you, or, oh, I didn't know you did that, or, oh, geez, I thought you did this other thing. And so that's really the issue about personal brand, is how do you make sure that we're able to convey to people who we are and what we're really capable of. And I also want to flag, I don't know if this is the case for any of you guys, but I've given tons of talks over the past year since my book came out, and oftentimes you'll find that some people, even the term personal brand kind of put some prickles on their skin. They don't like it, and they push back. They say, I don't want to have to be a brand. Why do I have to even think about this? This is ridiculous. I shouldn't have to market myself or sell myself the way that you would a detergent. But the truth is, that's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about some kind of fakery, some kind of slapping a label on something and what does the world want? How do I pretend to be more of that? That's actually the opposite of where we're going. Just as a little micro history lesson, this is the famous cover of Fast Company magazine from 1997. There was a cover story by Tom Peters, who you will recall as perhaps the first modern management guru, the author of the 1982 bestseller In Search of Excellence, and he wrote this cover story called The Brand Called You, and that really inaugurated the modern era of personal branding and people using that term. But it may be modern terminology, but it is a very old-fashioned concept, you could say. Fundamentally, what we are talking about is your reputation, and for any professional in the marketplace, we know that's crucial. So, you know, for anyone who pushes back and says, "Oh, I don't want to think about my personal brand," it's like, really? You don't want to know what your reputation is? You don't want to make sure that your reputation is what you wish other people to be thinking about you? So that's the thing. It's about how do you control it and make sure that people really are thinking the right things about you, so that you're able to access the kinds of business opportunities you need. So that's what we're going to be talking about. And I'd say just quickly that it's perhaps even more important these days because, you know, this is kind of what our social graph, as they call it, looks like, right? We've got too many connections. You're probably familiar with the Dunbar number, the famous sociological research saying that the maximum number of connections that humans can meaningfully have is about 150, that beyond that we get all scrambled. But you know what? I'm willing to bet between your Facebook, your LinkedIn, your Twitter connections or whatever, it's a lot more than 150. And the bottom line is that because we are subjected to such an onslaught of information, that means that people basically are they're getting such an overload of information, they really can't keep up with you or with most other people, maybe outside their parents and their spouse. So it's no wonder that their perceptions of you may be rooted in what you were doing 2 or 3 or 5 years ago. So we have to find a way proactively, you know, without sort of foghorning or looking like a jerk, but somehow we have to take action to make sure that the message gets through about what we do. This gentleman here, Stephen Rice, he's an executive vice president of human resources at Juniper Networks, the big Silicon Valley giant. And it's interesting. I mean, you know, I'm talking to a bunch of entrepreneurs, and this is a guy who is the head of talent for a very big company. But what he said to me, I think, is interesting. He says that when he's interviewing high-level candidates for jobs at Juniper, he always asks, how are you reinventing yourself? Not whether, not if, but how. Reinvention to him is mandatory, he says, because adaptability is the fundamental skill that we need in the marketplace today. And I want to say, you know, I'm including this because if that is true at a large technology company, it is even more true for entrepreneurs who are having to, you know, go at the speed of change and reinvent ourselves constantly to stay in front of the market and to make sure that we're offering value to the clients that we serve. So it's really these days almost everywhere, even in the traditional work world, but you know, especially where we are on the cutting edge, you have to reinvent. So as a consequence, this is the book that I wrote, Reinventing You, which came out last year from Harvard Business Review Press. And so some of the ideas we're going to be talking about today are drawn from that book. So basically, there's 3 steps that I wanted to talk with you guys about today in the course of reinventing yourself and honing your personal brand. First is discovering your brand. Next is sort of creating your brand. You know, first you discover what it is now. Next, you envision and determine, well, what do you want it to be and how do you get there? And then the third part is what I call living your brand, because you have to manifest it to the world in such a way that they really take it in and grasp it. Because if you tell somebody once, I mean, you know, right, it goes over people's heads, they won't remember. So you have to live it out consistently and demonstrate it in everything you do. So we're going to talk about those pieces. So how do you do that? The first thing, I like this quote. It's one of my favorite quotes in the book, so I like to throw it in. This here is a woman named Judy Robinette. She's a angel investor. She actually has her own book coming out this fall, which is probably worth checking out. It's a cool book, I think from McGraw-Hill, about networking. But anyway, I was having a conversation with her when I was when I was writing the book, and she said, "Dorie, this is so interesting. This really reminds me of an old Hungarian proverb." And of course, I looked it up, and I could find no evidence that it was a Hungarian proverb, so I'm attributing it to her. But she says, "If 3 people tell you you're a horse, buy a saddle." And basically, what this says is that, you know, you can think all you want about what your personal brand is, but ultimately your personal brand is what other people think it is. So we have to be cognizant that there probably may be a disconnect between what the world thinks and what you think, and it is in our best interest to become aware at a baseline sense of what other people think about us personally, about our company, etc. So how do you do that? There's some basic techniques that you can use. One really simple one, I was just giving a webinar for HEC Paris, as Alana was mentioning, the French Business School, and we were talking about, at a very basic level, just Googling yourself pretty regularly, but doing it with a lens, asking yourself, if this person didn't know me, if this person had no background information about me, and all they knew was what they see on the screen, what would they make of me? That's one technique. Another one, which I think is a pretty good sort of habit to get into, very simple. You can go to, say, 5 or 6 people that know you reasonably well. They could be friends, colleagues, etc. Ask them a question. If you only had 3 words to be able to describe me, what would they be? And the reason that that is a useful exercise, number one, it's not too taxing for them, right? They can do that in 2 minutes. But number two, the problem with all of us, I think we're pretty aware in general of the range of our traits, but because we are in our heads 24/7, we don't know what is coming through most strongly. It's really hard for us to weigh what seems to be a big factor and what isn't. And so if you force people to narrow it down to 3 words, that's it, you get a sense very quickly of what the patterns are, of what really seems to emerge most strongly and be resonating in people's minds when they think of you. Another thing is just a quick story that I'll tell because I think it's so interesting. As I was writing this book, I was giving a presentation for the Barr Foundation, which is the largest foundation in Massachusetts. And one of the people who works there is a woman named Mary Skelton Roberts. She's featured in my book. And she said to me afterwards, Dorie, what you were saying about really getting clear on your personal brand is so interesting. It reminds me of that time I had a focus group. And I said, that's phenomenal. Tell me more. What do you mean by that? And so it turns out that a few years prior, Mary was living in London, and she had an amazing job. She was an international conflict negotiator, which sounds pretty cool, but apparently one even gets tired of that. And so she was, kind of hit a plateau, and she wanted some guidance. And so a friend of hers offered to conduct a focus group about her. And so maybe some of you guys have participated in product focus groups. You try the different types of soda, and which one do you like best, or which brand of shampoo smells the nicest. Anyway, Mary, with her friend's help, she invited a dozen people over to her house one evening, and these were people, pretty good range, people who had met her fairly recently, people who had known her all her life, and Mary was not allowed to talk during this session. She had to sit in the corner. She could only talk if she was asking a clarifying question, but she just had to sit there, take it in. Her friend was the moderator, and they spent the evening asking questions like, Mary's greatest gifts are what? Or, I wish that Mary would explore more of whatever, or, different questions along those lines. And she said that at the end of the evening, it was one of the most revelatory experiences that she had ever had because other people could see things about her that she was not able to see. So I tell that story, and some people say, oh my God, that's great. I totally want to do that. And then it freaks other people out, which is why it's good, right? Because even if you don't do it, it's good sometimes to be a little freaked out. Getting feedback is challenging, but it's an interesting part of the process. But if that seems a little too intense, do the 3-word question, and that could begin to give you a good baseline of it. Now, second, I wanted to go into talking about creating your brand, as we were discussing. How do you determine what you want to be known as, and how do you take the steps to get there, to close that gap? This is a woman right here named Joanne Chang, and she is a little bit of a, you could say a local celebrity in Boston these days. She owns 3 bakeries, very popular bakeries, and a restaurant. And she's written cookbooks. She's very well known and very well respected. But I will tell you how she got her start. She got her start because right after college, like a lot of college people, she's funneled in. She was a math and economics major. So, guess what? She gets recruited by a prominent consulting firm. So she does this for 2 years. She decides she hates it, and she wants to do something different. It is 1993. That's the year, literally, that the Food Network launched. But it was not the mainstream phenomenon that it was, that it is today. And she thought back, you ask yourself these questions. Well, what do I love? What have I really enjoyed doing? And what she realized was that she used to bake cookies in her dorm, and she would sell chocolate chip cookies for $0.25 a piece to other students. And she said, you know, that's actually what I liked best. And so she decides she wants to be a chef. Her parents are mortified. She doesn't even have any connections. But what she does, and I think this is so significant, this is what you guys are doing all the time as entrepreneurs. And you know, it's important to underline it, because this is the value that we can bring, that the entrepreneurial attitude can bring to contemporary life, because too few people do this. Joanne Chang did not know a soul in the food industry in Boston, where she was. But what she did was she made a list of the most prominent chefs in the city. She wrote each of them, just before email, she typed out a letter to each of them. She explained who she was. She said, you know what, I want to change careers. I want to become a chef. I'm willing to do anything. I'm willing to start at the bottom. Will you talk to me? And it turns out that Lydia Shire, one of the great culinary legends of Boston, her prep cook quit the day before. She gets Joanne Chang's letter. She says, you sound interesting. Brings her in for an interview. Joanne gets the job. She does that for a year, you know, completely menial, chopping vegetables, washing things. That's what she does, but she learns it. For 8 years, she's under the tutelage of Lydia Shire. At the end of it, she has learned what she needs to know. She's become a successful culinary entrepreneur. Too few people are willing to make the ask. Too few people are willing, you know, they look in newspapers to see, you know, or not newspapers these days, but they look online to see, oh, what jobs are posted. But what you know and what the world needs to learn is you have to make your own opportunities. If you want to learn something, you build your own curriculum. You reach out to people. You ask about, you know, how do you learn it? How do you test drive that path? What are the strategies that you can use to build the skills that you need? It's not about accepting a sort of pre-written thing or looking at what the possibilities are that exist now. It's making new ones and inventing them for yourself. I also wanted to tell you one of my favorite entrepreneurial stories in the book. This is a guy named Craig Della Penna, who I came to know during my time I did bicycle advocacy, working in Massachusetts for a couple of years. I was the executive director of the state bicycling advocacy group, and Craig was one of our advisory group members. And so Craig's story, he had what for him was really a dream job for a number of years. He was the advocate, the sort of Northeast advocate for the Rails to Trails Conservancy. So he was fighting to get abandoned rail lines converted to bicycle and pedestrian paths. Very cool. You know, he was very dedicated. He loved cycling. So it was really a passion job for him. But as these things happen in our modern economy, one day they told him, Craig, we are closing your field office. Would you like to move to a different part of the country? And he did not want to move to another part of the country, so he lost his job. And so what do you do? Because, you know, we all think, oh, well, you know, if they're a marketing person, if they're a finance person, those skills are transferable. Craig's skills, quite frankly, were not that transferable in some ways. His claim to fame was that he was one of the, probably the world's most knowledgeable expert on New England rail trails. What do you do with that? Well, ultimately, the thing that we need to hone and practice and learn, which you guys do so well as entrepreneurs, is that we need to bust through the accepted paradigms and find new opportunities, and that is exactly what he did. Craig and his wife had always talked about wanting to own a bed and breakfast. It had been kind of a little dream of theirs that they had talked about. They said, maybe this is the moment. But they also asked, how do I apply what I know in order to be able to do that? And so they purchased a house that was literally adjacent to a rail trail. And they renovated it, they made it all nice, and they decided that they would brand it based on the rail trail. They call it the Sugar Maple Trailside Inn in Florence, Massachusetts. I've stayed there. It's very nice. And it is the bed and breakfast that in the world is closest to a rail trail. It's literally just a few feet away. And so they marketed it to all the people that Craig knew in the rail trail advocacy community. Like, hey, this is your perfect vacation spot. They had loaner bikes. They made up all this information that was helpful to people about going there to be able to cycle the rail trail. That was great. Then, at a certain point, Craig realized a lot of people were coming into his bed and breakfast. They wanted to buy houses in the area. They're like, this is fantastic. We want to live near a rail trail. So, this guy is good. He got his realtor's license, and he said, I'm going to start a business specializing in selling homes near rail trails. Pretty good, because he had an exhaustive knowledge all across New England of where the rail trails were and where they were going to be built. So that was fantastic. He later started his own real estate firm that was based on the premise, fantastic marketing, that they would bike to the showings so that people could test how bikeable the areas were and raise awareness about cycling that way. So it's really a question sometimes of thinking about how to transfer those skills and how to hone the message about what you're doing. Craig was someone that you could have pigeonholed and just said, you know what, that's an activist, professional activist who lost his job. That's too bad. He'll have to find something radically new to do. He'll have to give up his passion. But instead, he found a way to wrap his passion into a new entrepreneurial activity that's making him far more money than he did before, and he's still getting to make a difference and do what he loves. Another part that I think is worth mentioning is the idea of reintroducing yourself. I get questions all the time. I mean, many people, they're reinventing themselves as an entrepreneur and moving in perhaps to a new area, a new industry. How do you establish credibility under those circumstances? And one of my favorite stories, you might recognize this fellow, is Senator Al Franken. Now, we know what Al Franken was known for, right? For people who watched a lot of television, like me, in the late 80s, early 90s, probably far too much television. We all knew him from Saturday Night Live. Then, a few years later, he started writing biting political comedy books. Rush Limbaugh is a big fat idiot and things like that, not exactly nonpartisan. And so he had a brand. Here's this guy. He's a comedian, he's a jokester, he's a big partisan who's not afraid to throw arrows. That's not really the brand of a U.S. senator, but he wanted to become a senator. And so what do you do in that circumstance? Some people might say that you have to, how do you take your strong suit and his comedic ability, being quick on his feet, and turn it into something positive so he can pivot? But you know what? Oftentimes that is the right answer. But sometimes the brands are literally so contradictory that what you need to do is reach inside yourself and find the part that has been underdeveloped or underutilized and stress that instead. When Al Franken was going through, first of all, he built up important credentials. He was a fellow at Harvard at the Kennedy School, so he was able to get some sort of gravitas on his resume, so people saw, oh, okay, he's not just a comedian. He spent a full year touring around raising money for other candidates in Minnesota, so he built up his favor bank, and he got people thinking of him in the capacity of being a political advocate. That's good. He did those things, but instead he very strategically made sure that he was not deploying his humor. Everybody thought, that, oh, we're going to have a comedy routine. He's going to be a comedian running for the Senate. And he said, no, that's not the brand that I want. I'm going to be someone who is senatorial running for the Senate. And so the thing that had always been the strength that he led with, he realized was time to tamp that down and bring up other parts of him. You've all probably heard of, if not read, Marshall Goldsmith's book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There. And I think that was the realization that Al Franken had. So sometimes your old brand, which made you very successful in what you did, is not necessarily going to be the thing that gets you to the new place that you need to be. So thinking that through, the hallmarks of a senator, you have to be deliberative, you have to be relatively nonpartisan, you have to be someone with gravitas, and that was the signs of himself that he wanted to be able to show. So finally, the third part of what we're talking about is living your brand. How do you demonstrate to other people so that it really sinks in, so that they are able repeatedly to understand who you are and what you're capable of? Because having worked in politics myself, not for Al Franken, but elsewhere, there's a saying in politics, which some of you guys in the marketing realm might be familiar with as well. The saying is that people have to hear your name 7 times before they'll even think about voting for you. And so the idea is that you need to really, in a variety of ways, blanket people with who you are. In politics, it's maybe one hit is a radio ad, maybe another one's a yard sign, maybe another one is a door knocker coming to your door. Our tools in the business world are different, But similarly, you know, it's the same principle. You've got to make sure that people are repeatedly exposed to you so that they get it. Oh yeah, that's what she can do. So maybe it's blogging. Maybe it's having a friend mention you to that person. Maybe it's the fact that they see that you're a speaker on the program at a conference coming up. We're going to talk about those things. But how do you get those 7 hits that are necessary so that people can really understand and appreciate who you are? The first piece that I wanted to make sure to talk to you guys about, there's a sociologist at the University of Chicago named Ronald Burt, and he has studied extensively the concept of networks. You know, what makes a network work well? What makes someone indispensable in a network? This is particularly useful as you guys are you know, developing your own sort of entrepreneurial ecosystem, right? How do you tap into that, and hopefully how do you make yourself the center of it? How do you make yourself the red dot in the middle? So here's what Ronald Burt has said. He has discovered that, you know, you probably know this instinctually, that in almost any community, whether it's a corporation, whether it is a city in the way that the city works, there are silos. There are groups of people that don't talk to each other. And, you know, no matter how hard we try, it's human nature, right? You congregate with people who are like you. You fall into ruts. You get habituated. You have lunch with the same people. You go to the same meetings. You talk to the same folks. And so consequently, you're hearing the same things. It's like a feedback loop. And so what he has indicated is that if you truly want to make yourself indispensable in your network, which I suspect is probably a good thing for all of us in terms of positioning ourselves as entrepreneurial leaders, positioning our company in a strong way as part of the fabric of our community, you need to be the red dot in the center. And the way to do that is to be conscious of how you are spending your time connecting with people. We can't allow ourselves to just sink into habit. If you do that, you will revert to the same pattern that everyone else is doing. But if you break out of it, you can learn new information. The advantage of bridging the silos is that you have access to information that other people do not. You are learning about best practices, ideas that have been tried, things that work, things that failed. You have new ways of seeing things, which enables you to be uniquely valuable in your context. And this could literally be as simple as just saying, you know what, 1 hour a week, 1 day a week, I'm going to ask a different person, an unlikely suspect, out to lunch. If you do that literally within the course of a year, you're going to have 50 new contacts in diverse areas of your industry, your city, whatever it is. And it's going to allow you to have tentacles into these places so that you really are able to access valuable information. So the next piece that I wanted to talk a little bit with you guys about, it's metaphysical concept maybe, move where the wave is going. And I will tell you what I mean by that. So some of you guys may be familiar with Robert Scoble. He is a technology thought leader. He's he's considered to be he's a very opinionated blogger. He's been hired by first by Microsoft and then by Rackspace currently as essentially they're kind of like liaison to the startup world. If Robert Scoble writes about your technology startup, it is essentially the tech equivalent of being picked for Oprah's book club, right? It's like, oh wow, you made the big time. And one of the most interesting things, I write a blog for Forbes, as Alana was saying, and I interviewed Robert and talked to him a little bit about his origin story, right? How did he get started doing what he was doing? And interestingly, what he told me was that he went to San Jose State University. Now, a lot of people do things like that, right? This is a big school, a lot of people at San Jose State University, plenty of people there in the late 70s when he was there. But the interesting thing is that he looked around, he paid attention, and he saw around him this entrepreneurial ferment, right? A lot of people, they're just doing their own thing, they're keeping their heads down, they don't notice. Meanwhile, he says, there's Steve Jobs down the road, there's all these innovations, these things happening, And so he started writing a technology column for the student newspaper at San Jose State University. You know, easy, right? You can write a column about almost anything for your student newspaper. Anybody can do it. There's no barrier to entry there. Mostly they're glad for the content. But he started doing that because he paid attention and he said, I knew it was going to be big. And he was there at the right moment for the technology world to explode, for sure. But what I will say to you is that each of us, whether it's based on what our company does, maybe it's based on where we are geographically, maybe it's based on some particular skill set or demography that we have, whatever it is, we are in a place where something interesting is happening. The question is, are you noticing? Are you taking the time to lift your head up above the day-to-day of running your business and to notice what's going on around you, to see the long-term trends and to be able to be on top of them? Because Robert Scoble started out, doing free work for, a student newspaper. He was able to leverage that into getting a job writing for a computer magazine in Silicon Valley, which, as he says, was totally obscure. Nobody read it. But over time, it's meant that he's had 20, 30 years to build up a massive amount of expertise in the area. So where is the wave going in your industry, in your community, in your world, whatever that is, or however you define that? If you can see that, if you can get in on it in the early steps, that can give you a tremendously powerful opportunity. I mean, one latter example, because Scoble is a big fan of this philosophy, he really built his name in the past decade or so, past 10 or 15 years, based on his blog. But he said that when he really started to understand how big social media was going to be, social media was the next wave, he decided that he wanted to get involved and do stuff there. So he still blogs, but instead of spending most of his time blogging, he actually spends most of his time on social media now. And he was able, by being an early adopter, sort of advantages to that because the services will suggest you as someone that people should follow. He was able to get tens of thousands of Facebook followers. He has, I think, close to 3 million, maybe, Google Plus followers. I mean, it's really shocking. During one 3-month period, literally 90-day period, his posts garnered 750,000 comments on Google Plus. So that's the scale that we're talking about here. So it's pretty remarkable what can come from moving where the wave is going. Another strategy that I think is particularly important for entrepreneurs, we're all pitching all the time, right? This is life for us, is that that you eat what you kill. And so you have to make a good impression. This is nice for everybody else. It's mandatory for us. We need to walk into a room and be able to convey authority. We need people to respect us from the get-go because we need to be able to have them have enough confidence in us to make a sale, to close business, because that is how we thrive. So the question is, how do you do that? So there's a gentleman that I interviewed in Reinventing You named Robert Cialdini. Some of you may have read his fantastic book, I think one of the best business books of all time, called Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion. He's a psychology professor emeritus at the University of Arizona. No, that's not true, Arizona State University. And anyway, so Robert Cialdini, I interviewed him for my book, and he told me about a strategy which I think is fantastic, and I want to pass this along to you as news you can use. So what he suggests is that, based on his research, there are essentially these sort of hidden codes in terms of how we interact as humans, right? And it turns out that we are able to get away with doing things, saying things in the written word that we could not get away with saying in a spoken conversation. So if I walked into a meeting with you and I wanted to impress you, you could say, well, why don't you, well, Dorie, why don't you just tell the person, all your background? But honestly, if I went into a meeting and said, hi, I'm Dorie, let me start the conversation by telling you about all the great things about me, you are going to tune out in 5 seconds because I will sound like a jerk. I will sound totally arrogant. That's not what we want. That's what many people think of as like the bad example version of personal branding. But you do want the people to have that information somehow, right? So how do you balance it? What he suggests is what I will call the email strategy. And this is that in advance of meeting someone for the first time, because you'd like people to be so organized that they've researched you, they've researched your company, your product, your service, whatever. No, sadly, most people are overtired, overstressed, completely flaky. You'll walk into a meeting with them, they will have done no preparation, and then it's kind of on you to prove yourself, which is a lousy situation to be in. So instead of that, instead of waiting for that and hoping that that doesn't happen, a few days in advance of the meeting, you can send them an email, and you can say, Joe, I'm really looking forward to meeting you on Friday. In advance of our meeting, I wanted to share with you a little bit about my background as regards XYZ, whatever the topic is that you're going to discuss. I want this to be as productive and as efficient a meeting as possible. And so I thought it would be useful to mention, A, B, C. So you do this, you're able essentially to insert the highlights of your resume, the highlights of your bio there, and it is usually received very well because it is, as you say, in service of having a productive and efficient meeting. Who doesn't want that? But it means that if they read their email, even if they scan it for 20 seconds, they are aware of the most important parts of your expertise so that when you walk in the door, you don't have to prove yourself. You already have commanded the room. You already have conveyed your authority. So that's one powerful strategy that you can use. Another one that I like to talk about, and I think it's particularly useful for people in the entrepreneurial world because it really is a community. I mean, it's about helping each other. You can thrive because you understand it is not a zero-sum game. It's about building an ecosystem and a community where people can help each other prosper. And so I want to briefly just talk to you about Davos. So maybe some of you guys on this have been. I have not, but it's pretty cool, right? The World Economic Forum, Davos, Switzerland. Perhaps one of the most exclusive invitations that one can receive. It's where Bono hangs out with Angela Merkel and Angelina Jolie and all the leaders of world corporations. It's pretty cool, right? So Davos, how did this get started? Well, it's not somebody who was so connected, so famous. The way that it got started was this gentleman, Klaus Schwab, was a business school professor, regular guy. And he said, wouldn't it be great if there was a conference every year that talked about the state of the European economy? That's all it was. That's how it started. And then it became Davos. It became a thing. But a regular person can start something that becomes huge. You don't have to be anointed by someone. You don't have to wait for someone to give you permission to start something amazing. And there's a more, some people say, well, Dorie, it's crazy. I can't start at Davos. But I will tell you a story about something that you can start that might be valuable. Forgive me as I take my little Marco Rubio water break. You know how it goes when you get excited. So, all right, this is a gentleman named Robbie Samuels. I just had dinner with him on Friday, as a matter of fact. Robbie is, I think, a really interesting example. Because sometimes people say, well, geez, how can I get known? How can I build a strong personal brand? There's 7 billion people in the world. How am I ever going to get recognized? And the truth is, you don't need to be recognized by 7 billion people. It's not useful, not relevant. You don't even need to think about that. I'm willing to bet that your world, as you define it, is a lot smaller. Maybe it is entrepreneurs in your city. Maybe it is executives in your field or your niche that you work in. Whatever it is, I guarantee you it's a lot smaller than 7 billion. Robbie works as a nonprofit fundraiser in Boston, and he had a realization, which many people before have had, which is that as we saw with Ronald Burt and all the molecules, right? There's a lot of silos. There's a lot of silos in the world, and people are not talking to each other. And Robbie thought that was the case in the local nonprofit community, and he wanted to do something about it. But he realized that people were busy, they were overscheduled, they did not want to come to another meeting, even if it was for some good purpose, like, hey, let's break down the silos. They were maxed out. So he realized he had to do something different. And he said, well, what if I created something that was really fun and people wanted to go? And so for free, he started a meetup group. He called it socializing for justice. And So Just is the nickname. And so every month, every other week, there were different intervals, they would have a So Just event. It would be cocktails for justice, knitting for justice, bowling for justice, trivia night for justice. And the goal of it was just to bring people from the nonprofit community and their friends together for a fun opportunity to be able to connect, mingle, etc. Something that people wanted to do. In the process, Robbie has been doing this now for over 7 years. In the process, his mailing list, the number of members of Socializing for Justice, has grown to 2,400 people. The events are massively attended, extremely popular, and the bottom line for his brand, right? Every other week, at least, sometimes every week, people receive in their inbox an email from him. Every fun event that they go to, every person they meet through it, they have Robbie to thank. And so as a result of this, he has built a tremendous brand. There are 2,400 people that know him well, think of him favorably, know the stuff that he's capable of, and have a debt of gratitude. If you could have 2,400 people who felt that way about you, think what it would do for your business, for your career, for your personal brand. And he did it by offering value, by creating a way to connect other people. It was something legitimately useful and helpful, but in the process, it redounded to his own benefit. That's one of the most important lessons, I think, is that if we can, as you know, with the products and services that you create, if you can find a way to make yourself genuinely useful to other people, it's really powerful. Coming toward the end here, I would be remiss, of course, this is an online webinar, if I didn't talk about online branding. This is a really key piece, particularly if you are establishing a new identity for yourself as an entrepreneur, or maybe if you're moving into a slightly different product zone, realm, blogging, or otherwise creating content, because it's much easier to do now. You can do it with your telephone, basically. You can create a podcast because on these smartphones, the audio quality is so high. You can literally do a podcast just by monologuing into this or using it to interview somebody else and recording it that way. HD video on this. You can create a video cast. It's amazing. Whatever your method is, whatever feels most comfortable to you, it's about getting your ideas out there. This is a blog post, as you can see, that I did for the Harvard Business Review about 1.5 years ago. If you're serious about ideas, get serious about blogging. I believe it very strongly that we're professionals, we're knowledge workers, right? And so it's very hard for people to know if our ideas are any good unless they can see them on the page or watch them on YouTube or what have you. Otherwise, you never really know. But this way, you're able to mitigate people's sense of risk in dealing with you because they've seen your body of work. They know how you think. They can say, "Oh, wow, I really like her perspective," and it gives them a reason to want to do business with you rather than somebody else, which is very powerful because, as we know, we are all fighting the commoditization that is endemic in contemporary society. This is a way to make people want you specifically and not just somebody. So this again is Reinventing You because we're Americans. We're talking about personal brand. I might as well put a little link here just in case you're interested. That's my Amazon link. But anyway, it's great to talk with you guys about this. And Alana has been gathering questions from the audience. I'm looking forward to talking with you about all of them and about all of these elements. So at this point, I'll pass it over to Alana and to see what kind of exciting stuff has been coming through.
Wonderful. Dorie, thank you so much. Awesome, awesome presentation. I just said to Kim, I can't wait to go back and watch this about 10 more times because I couldn't write fast enough to capture all the great things you were saying. Thank you so much. For those of you with us, we have many of you, I hope that you will input additional questions into the questions box on your webinar dashboard, and Dorie will answer as many questions as possible. Dorie, the first question is this. The question is around a personal brand versus a company brand. So recall we have more than 100 entrepreneurs on the call with us today, and there's some question about, is your personal brand the same as your company brand, and how are those two things interleaved?
Yeah, really, really good and important question. So I actually wrote a blog post about this for, I think, my Forbes blog, maybe Huffington Post, one of them, who knows. Anyway, it was an interview with a gentleman named John Warrillow, who wrote a book that's worth checking out called Built to Sell. And it's specifically a book about if you are an entrepreneur, if you start a company, here's how to make your company more saleable, essentially. Whether or not that's literally your goal, to sell it in the near future, it's always a good idea to make it such that it could be sold if you want it to. And so we had a good discussion about this. And based on that, the distinction that I will make is that if you have a company that essentially you want the company to be inextricable with yourself, then yes, your personal brand and your company brand should be basically the same thing. I am a solo consultant. My company is called Clark Strategic Communications. I really don't care if anybody remembers the name of my company. It only matters, I'll submit my W-9 forms. It only matters when people write the checks, to give me money for consulting or speaking or whatever. What I expect and want people to be searching for when they're looking for me is Dorie Clark. That is going to be, my brand perennially. And so same deal, no big deal. I want to drive people to that one unified identity. I don't even have a Clark Strategic Communications website. My website is DorieClark.com. That being said, if you are conversely building a business that you think that one day you may want to sell, that it's a business but you want to move on from it, it's important to have that distinction, because if you are viewed as being too tightly enmeshed with it, then there will be serious questions about how viable the company is without you. And so if somebody does buy it, it'll be some onerous, like, well, you have to stay for 5 years and blah, 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 and you get locked in with that. So you want to make sure that you're having it be reasonably separate. I mean, just think of a prominent example. After Steve Jobs died, everybody was kind of freaking out because he had become so tightly wound to the Apple brand. People thought, well, Apple can't survive without him. They can't do it without him. And that, consequently the stock took a dive. So I would say the sweet spot, the best possible thing, if you do have a company that you want to sell, that you imagine maybe, you want to part with eventually, maybe you want to do something different, is if you're developing your own personal brand, that's great. You should try to take sort of like a Venn diagram, where the circles overlap. There are going to be certain areas where there's overlap. For instance, perhaps you want to be known as an innovative entrepreneur. Innovation is your brand. Okay, great. So you can write op-eds. You can, be the head of the, the such and such city innovation forum. That's awesome. And you want that, if it overlaps with your company brand, you want that to be able to shine a light on it. But you also want to be careful that when the company is written about, that you are able to bring up other people, that you allow other spokespeople, that you allow other people to be profiled, etc., so that it's not just all about you, because otherwise it damages your ability to extricate yourself from the company in the long term.
Thank you. Another important question, and it says, how do you recover or restore a personal brand that has gone wrong?
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes you see examples of this, and it can be unfortunate. So I have a couple of answers to this. One, just very tactically, in like an online element, because I was just with HEC Paris, I was giving a talk about online personal branding. The bottom line, the most important thing for you guys to know, because of course nothing ever really disappears from the internet. Generally, you can't. I mean, if it's like your buddy posted a party picture that you don't want, you can email them and say, can you take it down? But usually, unfortunately, it's more complicated if there's stuff out there that you don't want. Usually it's not as easy as just asking someone to take it down. And so the real thing that we need to keep in mind, and it's part of why I really drive the message of content creation, is that you're not going to get stuff down from the internet, but you can drown stuff out on the internet. If you are creating tons of content, that is what Google is going to say, oh, that's really relevant. Oh, yeah, she wrote that. Great. So you have a billion blog posts. They're going to put that on the first few pages, and the bad stuff goes back to page 27, where, yeah, somebody can find it eventually, but most people are not going to care that much to go look it up. So you want to drown it out. But broadly speaking, if you had because I used to work in political campaigns, which for better or for worse means that I've done a lot of crisis communications. What you want to do is you really you need to own your mistake, if it is a mistake, and find a way to actually turn that into a positive for your brand. You look at somebody, let's take a political example. You look at somebody like John McCain. Now we think of him as like, oh, he's a campaign finance guy, right? Well, why is he a campaign finance guy? It's because in the late 80s, he was involved in the Keating 5 scandal. That was a campaign finance related scandal, and so that could have terribly damaged him, and it nearly did. But instead, he said, all right, I'm going to take it in and I'm going to own it. And so therefore, the message becomes, well, because of this thing that I've gone through, because of the lessons I've learned, I'm going to become a champion of this issue instead. And so that has become a more powerful part of his brand. You look at somebody who's had kind of a meltdown recently. I was just talking about this in a Huffington Post interview I did. A gentleman named Phil Simon interviewed me, and we had a good conversation. He brought up Justine Sacco. Some of you guys may remember she is was a top PR professional for a big company, and she had sent out some rather insensitive tweets about going to Africa and the AIDS crisis in Africa. And it was discovered, and so literally she's on a plane to Africa, and she's clueless about it because she's not having internet access on the plane. By the time she lands, she's lost her job because of the furor that these tweets have created. And so that's really tough. I mean, her name has gotten out there. She's become a real target because of the things that she wrote. How do you resolve that? You can't just pretend it doesn't happen, because people are going to remember, and it's going to look weird and phony. The only thing you can do, if you are someone like Justine Sacco, is to position yourself as a spokesperson about how to overcome crises or about how to maintain your brand online, because she can say, you know what, I learned the hard way. I want to help you learn to do it better. If you do that and you own it, I think most people respect it.
Dorie, I think that makes sense. And there are two questions that are sort of related to this, but I want to ask them both at the same time. And I really think this last answer is kind of a launch point for this. So the first question is, when launching, let's see, wrong one. Okay, when redefining yourself or changing careers, do you keep old links that define your past, or do you start fresh? So that's the first one. And then the second question is, once you have reinvented yourself and you're ready to present the reinvented you, how do you go about launching yourself? Is it through a blog or through, as you're describing, kind of content creation and drowning out the old? So this is sort of an interesting juxtaposition. What part of the old do you try to maintain or retain, if any? And then is there some event or launch point that actually makes the new you come about?
Yeah, great questions. So it's interesting. People are going to have different views about this, but I'll tell you the story about a woman that I know named Dana Boyd. She is a researcher at Microsoft Research. She has a book that came out actually just last month called It's Complicated, which is a book about the online social lives of teenagers, which is what her field of specialty is. And she kind of comes by this naturally. She's in her 30s now, but she started in the early days, in the 90s, blogging. They didn't call it blogging then. I think they called it live journaling, and writing all this stuff online. And I mean, like, she's a teenager, right? So she's writing about, like, I love this band so much, and like all these things. She's writing about her personal life, her dating life, and it's really interesting because a lot of people would say, well, geez, now that you're like 35 and you're a professional with a doctorate, maybe you should take this old stuff down, And she actually has said, and I think this is very interesting, I respect this, she says, I refuse to be embarrassed about the things that I have written in the past. I'm going to leave it up. And her view is that, essentially kind of desensitize people to it because there's such a volume, and that people, because she keeps creating content. And maybe one thing, if that was like the only thing you could find about her online, is like what bands she liked when she was 17. But she keeps creating content, and so people, she believes, need to really understand the totality of who she is and what her brand is. And so what I would say is that ideally you want to create a narrative that helps explain how you got from here to there. You don't want to destroy all the past stuff. I wouldn't take down the old links, because you know what, it's part of who you are. And presumably whatever you learned in that first phase of what you did, makes you better at what you're doing now. You've got to learn how to tell that story. One of the stories that I tell in Reinventing You is about a woman named Libby Wagner, who, she has kind of an interesting route that's different than many people. Her route was that she was a poet. She was a tenured professor. She had an MFA. She published multiple chapbooks of poetry. She became a management consultant. Very different. And she had to establish credibility in this new realm. And at first, she tried to hide that she was a poet. She thought it would make people take her not seriously. And so she played it down. She didn't talk about it. But eventually she came to realize that it actually was a strength. And so she started talking about it. She created an email called the Boardroom Poet. That's her Twitter handle now, because it really was a competitive advantage, that she understood the nuances of language better than other people could, better than a traditionally trained MBA could. But it took her a while to really embrace that. So I would say don't delete the old stuff. Instead, find a way to describe how the old stuff contributes to the new stuff and makes you better at it. And in terms of the second part of the question about how do you really launch it, blog is a great way to do it, because whenever you're talking to people, blogs are great because, people can discover you when they're searching on Google for stuff, but particularly in the early days, what's nice is you're talking with people you meet at a Chamber of Commerce meeting, you're talking to prospective clients, and they will mention something related to what you do. Maybe you've become a social media consultant, and they say, oh gosh, my Facebook strategy, I just don't know what to do, right? And you could say, well, I just wrote a blog post about that. I wrote, 10 things that you should do about Facebook when you don't know what to do about Facebook. Let me send it to you. And that's an incredible credibility statement, because it shows that you've been thinking about these things deeply. So being able to send that over is really great. Also, getting involved in any kind of big project or whatever. If there's an organization you're involved in, you could say, you know what, I will chair the initiative on XYZ. And that's kind of a big public platform and a kind of coming out about your new thing that you're doing.
Fabulous. That's a great answer. So I'm going to ask you one final question. We're coming up to the top of the hour here. And there's this great question. I call it the fake it till you make it question. And it is this. The listener says, to project as an expert, does one really have to be an expert?
Yeah, so it's a great and important thing to note. Here's what I would say. You never want to be in a position where you're essentially, lying to people about what you know, because the risks of getting caught, first of all, it's not a nice thing to do, but second of all, the risks of getting caught or getting found out are too high to bear. You don't want to do that. However, I think that many of us, as we're starting out in something, of course we don't feel as confident as we would if we had 5 or 10 years of experience doing it. And so you do need to practice your way into doing it. In Reinventing You, I profile a woman named Alyssa Cohn, who's a executive coach, and she told me this amazing story. When she became an executive coach, she was still in her late 20s, and she said that she was so nervous that people she knew would be like, well, what do you know about that? That she took 2 years to send out an email to her list to be like, hey, I'm an executive coach now. And she said that when she was first meeting people, she would sort of betray herself a little bit. They'd say, what do you do? And she'd say, I'm an executive coach. Basically like she's asking for permission. And of course, the thing is that she knew plenty. She absolutely knew enough to be a good executive coach, but she hadn't yet fully inhabited it. And so I think that's the thing, is that for many of us, it's not that you want to pretend that you have done things you haven't done, or you know things you don't know, but for many of us, we have the talent and ability within us, and it's hard to just summon it up to be like, yes, I own this, yes, I can do it. And so there is an element of fake it till you make it. I think that's totally legitimate. The asterisk that I'll put on it, I will borrow a phrase from Amy Cuddy, the Harvard Business School professor, someone I know here in Boston, and someone who gave, some of you may have seen, a very famous TED Talk. Her phrase that she prefers is fake it until you become it. And that's really the key. It's not about misrepresenting who you are or what you can do. It's about understanding that you have the strength and the confidence within you, and finding ways to practice that and embody that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dorie. This has been just an amazing hour. Thank you so much for your time and energy and your willingness to use our webcam. That's super exciting for us here at Kauffman FastTrac. For those of you who have joined us for this morning's talk, thank you for being with us. I hope you'll join us again next month. We'll come together on Wednesday, April 16th, to listen to another great Boston author, Robert Stephen Kaplan. His book is entitled What You're Really Meant to Do, A Roadmap for Reaching Your Unique Potential, and I look forward to seeing you all then. Everybody have a great day. Dorie, thank you.